Now, in the previous video, we were looking at Piaget's pre-operational thought, and we talked about how Piaget believed that these were some of the problems that children at this stage, sorry for the spelling again, that Piaget believes were children of this age found problematic. So one was that they have problem in dual representation. We said that this gets better as children age. Obviously, there are individual differences. If children have parents who read to them, who show them a lot of books and point out whatever is in the book in the real, to what it represents in the real world as well, that obviously helps children in developing dual representation, right? Then we said that their thinking is marked by this propensity to think in terms of magical ways, animistic and magical thinking. Right, then you also have egocentrism, right? That they believe that their perspective is another person's perspective too. Then you have that their thinking is marked by this propensity of centration and irreversibility. Right? Right? Now what we'll consider is, what does follow-up research say about all of this? Yes, we forgot one very important thing, this inability to conserve. Now I'll very quickly go over some follow-up research. I've mentioned some in the sense that when we're considering dual representation, there are certain factors that seem to help. So for example, a child's home environment, how much they're exposed to symbols, how much they're used to working around symbols, that obviously has an impact on how well they're able to represent dually. Again, we've talked a little bit about animistic and magical thinking as well, that culture, upbringing could have a role to play in this as well, that if you belong to a culture where things are ascribed to magical events, then obviously a child will have more of that propensity as well. They might not outgrow it either as they age, right? Egocentrism, again, so this depends, because one of the things that you see when we consider this is that there's an experiment, and I'll try to upload that video, in which what happens is that with 15-month-old children, right, what a researcher does is that they present a 15-month-old child to two different things, two different bowls actually, right? One of those bowls has broccoli. Sorry for my drawing. The other bowl has, I think it has crackers, yes. So let's just draw crackers. Right. And the 15-month-old, you ask them what they like, right? Most 15-month-olds will pick the crackers, right? And then what you do is that, but in front of them, you taste both, right? You taste some of their crackers and you taste some of the broccoli. And when you taste the crackers, you say, oh, I really don't like the crackers, right? And when you taste the broccoli, you say, I love the broccoli, right? Now what you do next is that, you say to them, why don't you give me a little bit of what I like, right? Now what the 15-month-old likes is crackers, right? What you like is broccoli. That's what you've shown them, right? Right? Now, according to egocentrism, if a child is unable to sort of think about the feelings of others as being different from their own, the child will always give you crackers, right? If you say, give me what I want, right? Because they're unable to differentiate, according to Piaget. But one of the things that you see is that children do understand that, you like something different. And when you ask them this, so they will give you broccoli, right? So that's an interesting research on egocentrism and children's understanding of what other people want and how that can be different from what they themselves want. And this is a very young age group, so this is not even 2 years yet. And with Piaget overall, there's been a lot of criticism in terms of that he really in some ways underestimated what children were able to do, because one of the things that you look at when you look at inability to conserve, now even when you consider follow-up research here, right, one of the things that you see is that if you sort of reduce the number of objects, so one of the tasks that we looked at was conservation of numbers, right? Which basically was that you have 6 pennies, you have them lying to a particular distance to one another, versus if you have 6 pennies which are more spaced out and you ask the child which row has more, right? But when you look at conservation of numbers and you decrease the number of items you have, so let's say, sorry for that, you only work with 3 pennies, right? So you space them out and you put them close together. And then you ask a child which has more. One thing that you find is that most children then are able to answer correctly that they're the same amount. So it basically could be that children this young are overwhelmed by the number of objects that they see in front of them, and they're not able to conserve number when that number exceeds a particular limit. But if you decrease that number, so they are able to conserve somewhat effectively. There is criticism on Piaget as well, in the sense that when you talk about inability to conserve and some of those conservation tasks, a lot of people argue that the language used in those tasks is somewhat tricky, and children have a problem with the language of those tasks more than the cognitive challenges that they pose in themselves. So that is one criticism. Another thing that you see is that even when we're talking about egocentrism and perspective taking, right, that sort of experiment in which you have a 3D model in front of a child showing mountains, and you're asking them what is a doll seeing. So that is not an everyday problem that children encounter. If you give them more of an everyday problem that they encounter, in terms of you have them look at pictures of their own room and place different people on different corners and ask them what would their perspective look like from that particular point. So what you see is that they're able to answer more correctly. What that tells us is that if you use familiar objects, children's performance tends to get better. If you use a smaller number of objects, their performance seems to get better. Again, when you consider categories, so we considered this example last time, the flowers example, in which there are blue flowers and there are yellow flowers, and when you ask a child if there are more yellow flowers or flowers, right, so they cannot answer correctly. And Piaget basically believed that children are not able to categorize based on the findings on this task, but you do find that children are able to categorize to some extent. If for example you tell them, if they're playing with animals and you tell them that these are warm-blooded animals and these are cold-blooded animals, and you then tell them that this is an animal which has warm blood, so they will categorize that animal with the warm-blooded animals that they see. So again, they do have some ability to categorize. It might not be extremely complex at that stage, but that doesn't mean that the ability in itself is not there. What else? One of the things that you do see is that especially when you're talking about categorization, As children's vocabularies tend to become more complex, their categories tend to become more complex as well. So, these processes run side by side, and we will consider language development as well. But yes, so, this is about it for Piaget. Next, we move on to Vygotsky. Now, what was Vygotsky saying, which was important? One thing that you need to remember is that the Piaget's theory and Vygotsky's theory, when we talk about any theories regarding child development, those theories do have implications for practice. What does that mean? That basically means, let me just write that down here. What that means is that, if, for example, you're opening a school and you're, a school for, let's say, very young children, and you want to follow, Piaget's theory, so your classroom will look different if you want to follow Piaget's theory versus if you want to follow Vygotsky's theory. Right? We'll look at how exactly these would differ, but yes, first let's look at Vygotsky. So one of the things that Vygotsky believed, which differed from Piaget, was one of the things that researchers notice when they work with children is that children use a lot of, they talk to themselves when they're playing, right? So Piaget believed that this was another proof of children's egocentrism, and he called it egocentric speech, right? And Piaget believed, sorry, it's the wrong arrow. Oh my god, wrong spelling again. So Piaget believed that private speech was something that was egocentric, right? This, speech that children use when they're doing any sort of task in which they're talking to themselves. So he believed this was further proof of them being egocentric. Vygotsky was not of that opinion. What he believed, and this is what research supports as well, that children use this speech, right? Initially, it's more overt. Over time, this speech becomes, what he called private speech, in the sense that it becomes more internalized, right? Vygotsky believed that this habit of speaking to oneself, it helps children focus attention. It helps them, retain attention on one task. So not just focus attention, but in some sort of memorization as well, right? To aid memory, to aid in planning, right? And to sort of reflect on what they're doing as well. So children use private speech for all of these different reasons, and with age, what happens to private speech is that it becomes more internalized. So it becomes more like whispers or lip movements. One of the things you might have noticed is that when you're doing a quiz, some of you are also sort of talking to yourself. So that again is an example of private speech, and the more complex the task is, the more you see of it. Furthermore, Vygotsky believed in this sort of approach. Basically, Vygotsky believed in something that he called the zone of proximal development. So rather than being, rather than there being cut-offs for particular kinds of development, Vygotsky believed that there were zones of development. So a child could accomplish certain tasks. There were zones in which a child could accomplish certain tasks if they were assisted, or he called this particular approach scaffolding. So with Piaget, what you see is that there are certain stages, right? So 2 to 7 is pre-operational stage, where a child will be mastering certain tasks. According to Piaget, there were different zones, so they're not these cut-offs, right? So let's say here it's 2 to 7, right? And a child could achieve more than what Piaget believed? Were they assisted in doing that task? Now, what exactly does that mean? Let me give you an example of Vygotsky's idea of scaffolding. Now, if you look here at this conversation, this is a mother and child who are working on a jigsaw puzzle. Now, Sammy says, I can't get this one in. And, Sammy's trying to insert a piece in the wrong place. And the mother says, which piece might go down here? And she points to the bottom of the puzzle. And Sammy says, his shoes. But, again, tries the wrong one. Mother says, well, what piece looks like this shape? And she points again to the bottom of the puzzle. And Sammy says, the brown one. Tries it and it fits. Then attempts another piece and looks at his mother. And the mother says, try turning it just a little. And she gestures to show him. And Sammy says, there. And, then puts in several more pieces while his mother watches. So basically what is happening here? The mother is not saying to the child, oh, give me the pieces, I'll put them in for you. She's basically training him how to think, right? When she's saying, which piece might go down there, right? And then when she's saying, well, what piece looks like this shape, right? And then she's teaching him and she's saying, try turning it just a little. So basically what she's doing is that she's assisting the child in doing the task themselves, right? So they're able to complete this jigsaw puzzle at perhaps an age at which, it's not normally possible for children to be able to put together a jigsaw puzzle, right? So this, this sort of task was within this child's zone of proximal development, right? They couldn't have done it themselves, but had, if they're assisted, then they are able to accomplish this task, right? So that is basically Vygotsky's idea of scaffolding. And when, we were talking about this, that, what are the implications for practice, right? Now, with a Piaget sort of classroom, if you're following Piaget's method, right, that would be more discovery-based learning. In the sense that you let the child discover things on themselves. Versus with a Vygotsky, if you're inspired by Vygotsky, that would be, more assisted learning or scaffolding, in which there's gentle assistance to, whatever a child is doing for them to accomplish more than what is typical of their stage with, a certain amount of help. And this is actually sometimes called assisted discovery. Right? So this is what it is. Right? Now we consider the third perspective, which is the information processing perspective. What does the information processing perspective do? The information processing perspective basically looks at how different, processes are developing and how they're enabling you or stopping you from accomplishing different cognitive tasks. So when we consider something like, ability of children to, what we considered in Piaget's tasks, the conservation tasks, right? So the information processing theorists would, first of all, say that one of the things that's developing at this stage but has not really developed fully is the ability to inhibit certain responses, right? And this is extremely essential because you need to inhibit certain responses in order for other responses to come about, right? So when you have a task such as that, in which you had, let's say, this is not a flower, in which you had 4 blue flowers, right, and a lot more yellow flowers. Right? And you ask a child, are there more yellow flowers or are there more flowers? And they say there are more yellow flowers. So according to information processing theorists, that's because they're unable to inhibit what seems to be the first possible, response. Because, when you look at this picture, there are more yellow flowers, right? That sort of stares out at you. So they're unable to inhibit this response, which is the first response that comes to their mind, and to look for another response, right? So that's one of the first things that information processing theorists will look at, that their ability to inhibit is still something that needs working on, right? Then again, information processing theorists will talk about memory and how that's developing. One of the things that you see is that in children, they're not yet using memory strategies. So they're not yet, rehearsing or recalling. One of the reasons researchers say, state for this is that using memory strategies takes up too much space in children's working memories, and that's why they do not, they do not use a lot of memory strategies, and that obviously has then consequences for how well they're able to do on memory tasks, right? Again, you have this distinction between recall and recognition. Again, recognition is always better. One of the things that you see is that, when you're talking about memory, is how children are developing scripts. And a script is basically, what children believe a certain activity comprises of. So, for example, all of us have a script for when we go to a restaurant. So, for example, we sit down, we select a table, we ask for the menu, we order our food, we pay for it, and then, we have some, fun in the middle of it, we have some conversation, and then we leave, right? So that's a script. You have a script for, when you go to a relative's house. You have a different script for when someone comes to visit your house. You have a different script for when you go to your friend's house, right? So children at this stage, they are developing scripts, and they're, if you ask a child what happens when they go to a restaurant, the script will be a very simplified version, right? But it will be in the correct chronological order, like in the sense that it will be in the correct sequence. What that means is that they will say that, you go, you order food, you eat, and you leave, right? It's in the correct order. They won't say that you go to the restaurant, you pay, and then you eat, or something like that, right? It's basically that you go there, you order, you eat, and you pay, right? So one of the things that you do see is that children are developing scripts at this stage. What else? Another thing that you do see is, which is extremely important, is children's theory of mind. Right? In the sense, what do they understand about their own mind and the minds of others? So here again, you have a classic experiment here, in which what happens is that, you present a child with two different boxes, right? So one is a box which usually has, this sort of mark on it, which indicates that this has band-aids in it, right? And one is a simple plain box, right? This is a sign that there are band-aids, right? And you present these two boxes, and you say to a child, if you were to look for band-aids, what box would you look in? Obviously they pick this box, right? Now you ask them to open this box, and this box does not have any band-aids, because you put all the band-aids in this plain box, right? Now the child knows that the band-aids are not in the box that has the sign of band-aids, but are in the box that is the plain box, right? Now what you do is that you bring about a doll, and you say, now this doll suddenly fell and bruised herself or cut herself, right? And now she's in need of band-aids. Now where do you think she would look for the band-aids? Now what does this require? Now this requires the child to inhibit what they themselves know, right? Right? About where the band-aids are. right? And to sort of reason such that this person is coming in and they, what is their, it requires some sort of understanding of their mind, right? Right? So it requires some sort of theory of mind again, right? One of the things that you see is that younger children are not able to perform correctly on this task. So they will say that, she'll look here. But as children get older, they are able to understand that, this person will also look there, right? This doll will also look there because that is the box with the Band-Aid sign, right? And that requires that they're able to inhibit what they themselves know, and that they have some ability, or they have some theory of mind, they have some understanding of how another person's mind works, right? So this is again another classic example of which is used to check for children's theory of mind.